Good morning, gearheads. Welcome to Speed City F1 on Sirius XM. This is John Massengill sitting in the studio in Austin, Texas, joined by my friend Les Kaiser, and we're joined over Zoom by Mr. Bob Varsha. Gentlemen, how are you? How are you, Bob?
I'm doing great, thanks. Beautiful day here in Atlanta. Everybody's still tingling over the result of yesterday's Petit Le Mans up at Road Atlanta, which was really exciting. Maybe you caught it on TV, as well as all the Formula One activities down in Brazil. We're ready for a race.
Ready for some action, and I'm really excited. We're about an hour away, of course, and I want everybody to grab a cup of coffee or grab whatever you got and sit down and settle in.
And
And
we're saying whatever revs you up.
whatever revs you up. That's right, and we're going to get you ready for the Brazilian Grand Prix. And man, what a weekend it's been already, with all sorts of penalties and fines and dollars changing hands between Max Verstappen and the FIA crew. So it is. There's
Yeah.
lots to talk about. We had sprint race qualifying. We got all that to talk about, and of course we have our post show after the race. So we got our 1 hour pre-show. Stay here for the entire race, and we have our post show after that. And we got a great guest for the post show because we have probably the hottest young American driver, or certainly one of them. Kyle Kirkwood is going to join us to talk about his new IndyCar rides. He's going to join us in the post race show. But gentlemen, I think I want to talk. I want to start the day off and talk about the sprint race qualifying, and I want to start by talking about it in the general terms, and then we'll get into the details, because it seems to me, and Bob, we touched on this just a few minutes ago before the show, but I want to get your take on this in depth, because it seems to me that everybody seems to like this, including the promoters, right?
Absolutely. I mean, Ross Braun, who runs Formula One for Liberty Media, says that all sorts of promoters are asking to have a sprint race in their event next year. Braun says we're probably going to go from 3 to 6. They're going to tweak the system a little bit so that the Friday fast time is in fact credited as the pole sitter, and they're going to add more championship points to give the drivers greater incentive from front to back to do well. So yeah, apparently it appears to be a hit, which to me is kind of surprising because, as I've always said, change is hard for everybody. And this whole idea of reverse grids that came up years ago and was pretty soundly put down suddenly seems to be sneaking back to the forefront of everybody's thinking right now.
Yeah, Les, change in Formula One is very hard, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It is. And think of on the pro side, the good side of a sprint race. I think it was George Russell said that, well, now Fridays are more meaningful to us.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, sitting in the fan seat, oh, yeah, the racing starts early. I don't care what you call this. Everything got shifted out, moved up sooner. So the Friday practices mean more. The sprint race on Saturday means more. Everything about it has just stretched out the value to more days. And quite honestly, I think that's a good thing for the sport, to give the fans more exposure to cars and anger.
I remember when they first talked about this. Yes, you're right. Fridays have a whole new meaning now. You're not going to miss qualifying on Friday, right? And
Right.
but they talked about how that some people may not have time, in this world of consuming content, and there's so much competition because there is lots of good content now. You can get whatever you want and it's fed to you automatically. But maybe you don't have time for the full race on Sunday. That was one of Ross Braun's comments early days, but may not have time for the race on Sunday, but you're going to watch the qualifying race. Because, Bob, and let's talk about the nuance of the difference between a qualifying sprint race and actual qualifying, about the way you set up a car. We saw dramatic differences this weekend, didn't we?
Oh, absolutely. Formula One qualifying is the quest for the ultimate lap time. You really need to get after it. And that often entails a completely different setup, completely different thinking, both from the team and from the driver, who has to suck it up and do that one ultimate lap, which is one of the great challenges and one of the great institutions, frankly, in motor racing. But then a Saturday sprint race would call for some different kinds of thinking and setups and what have you, and tire usage. And then the Sunday Grand Prix is another cat altogether. So yeah, it really does liven up the weekends, I'd say, and it's been a pretty successful innovation. Now consider yourself like Lando Norris did not qualify well on Friday, got into the sprint race, solved some problems, and now he'll start up in the first 3 rows for the Grand Prix. And I'm sure he's delighted to have had that opportunity on Saturday to improve a fairly dismal qualifying by his standards on Friday.
Yeah, that's a perfect example, isn't it, Les? Yeah.
Absolutely. And it kind of gives some more opportunities as well as entertaining the fans. So I like that. The race teams were concerned about, they've essentially stretched out and added a different format of a race. Yes, it's a sprint, but it's a race that they've given that, and the risk it provides the team because you're out there racing for position and the cost that are incurred. And so, there's some pushback on that. I'm anxious to hear what is said after the end of the season about these 3 events. Obviously, Formula One is moving forward, hoping for 6 in the next year. So I don't think it's going away.
Yeah, hoping for 6 sprint races next year. I'm all in on this. I'm all in because I think that it has added some things that we've talked about. I think that the fans are warming up to it. There's going to be some diehards that are still not. And yeah, I suppose if you went down every bullet point, there's going to be some things that some people don't like. But I think it was a great move and another good move by Liberty Media.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate it. I think it's just one more of the things that Liberty Media is getting into and realizing fans want more contact. They want more content, firsthand content. In fact, we were talking about how much content is available, but someone that has firsthand contact, that has relationships with the teams that are there on site, things like that is just phenomenal. We love sharing the Haas stories and all of our relationships with the audience.
Well, speaking of contact, if you want to call and join the show and tell us what you think, we really would like to hear. We had a really nice anecdotal survey all season long from people all over the country talking about the Netflix series, really for the last couple of years, about how new fans came through that. Well, I want to get the same feedback from everybody on what they think of the sprint races. So give us a call, 512-643-5483.
Yesterday, I had a gentleman visiting, and he is a die-hard, flannel-wearing, cap-wearing NASCAR boy. Good guy. And he just started smiling, and I was wearing a racing cap, and he started telling me, he goes, I've actually started watching Formula One. I'm, teasing. Okay, I love you, buddy, but I'm not sure he could spell it before seeing Netflix.
Yeah.
But now he is in it.
Well, you saw, I think we may have talked about this last week, but absolutely, there is a lot of crossover, a lot more crossover than I would have guessed. I was looking at the ESPN numbers and stuff. Bob, did you see that where there was a lot of NASCAR and Formula One watchers both?
Yeah. And it's, it's great. So you're late to the party, but you're at the party now. And hopefully the enthusiasm for Formula One and the kind of entertainment it presents will continue to grow and grow.
It's all great. The keg's not floated. Come on over.
All right. Well, let's see, boys. Give us a call. Let us know what you think. 512-643-5483. But let's talk about the sprint race yesterday. And in fact, let's talk about what led up to that. I think we have to start there because the weekend started with all sorts of interesting touching of cars and
misdemeanors.
Yeah, misdemeanors. Bob, you wanna start with what Max Verstappen did to start this crazy fines and everything else?
Well, after qualifying, Mad Max got out of his car and went over to Lewis Hamilton's. Of course, Hamilton has a fresh engine. He's got a 5 grid spot penalty, so he'll start 10th in today's Grand Prix. But he was, first among non-equals in qualifying. 4/10 of a second clear of Max Verstappen on a track where the lap time is about 1 minute and 8 seconds, one of the shortest of the year. So Lewis was just supreme with that fresh Mercedes engine. So Max gets out of his car and goes over and is looking at the rear wing of the Mercedes, and he reaches out and he touched it, which may not sound like a big deal, but it is against the rules technically. So he and his team were called before the stewards to explain what he had done. And it's ironic because the rear wing that he was looking at then tripped up fast qualifier Lewis Hamilton, because the post-race scrutiny or post-qualifying scrutineering checks revealed that on the right-hand side of the rear wing, the opening when the DRS was engaged and the top flap flipped up to give maximum speed on the straightaways, it opened farther than the rules would allow at 85 millimeters. So there was a black and white technical violation for Lewis, and he and the Mercedes team went before the stewards. And in the end, Lewis wound up being sent to the back of the grid for the sprint race. His qualifying times were disallowed, and Verstappen was allowed to keep his second place position, and they simply lightened his wallet by 50,000 euros, which of course is chump change for somebody like Max. But
just one more example of
the two top protagonists were hit.
Yeah, just one more example. If you're going to touch, you got to pay extra. So the maximum gap is measured in accordance with TD 011-19, pushing an 85 millimeter gauge against the gap with a maximum load of 10 Newton meters. If the gauge goes through, then the car has failed this test.
Bob, you were giving us a good example before we came on, physically, literally with your hands showing us, but talk about how this thing works exactly.
Well, it's essentially a very sophisticated and futuristic lollipop. It's a disc, 85 millimeters wide in diameter, on the end of a stick, and on the other, a metal rod. And at the other end of that is a meter measuring the force with which the disc is pushed between the rear wing elements in the open DRS position. And if the disc slides right through within the force tolerances, that means the opening is too wide. It should come into the opening, stop there, and when the 10 Newton feet or whatever are applied, it should not move among the rear wing elements. And in Lewis's case, it did. It's another one of the situations where you think, like, how can it possibly make a difference if it's 1 millimeter too wide? But a rule is a rule, and the same is true of Max Verstappen. What could he have possibly done to affect Lewis's rear wing just by touching it when he got out of his car in a very, very casual way? But again, a rule is a rule. And it's not unusual, it must be said, for drivers to take a really close look at their opponent's cars when they come into park for May. I mean, we've seen drivers, I think it's Max, who likes to use his foot to kind of push the car, his opponent's car, forward so he can examine the tire degradation that the guy experienced. So it's, why they chose this moment to clap down, I'm not sure, but they did have a formal presentation from the technical chief, Joe Bauer, saying, this wing does not pass inspection. What do you guys want to do about it?
And you know what? Someone messaged us, Bob, and they actually asked you specifically. They said, so were the two things coincidental? And they said, was the fact that Max was over there looking at the car, and then all of a sudden the FIA starts looking at Lewis Hamilton's car. Was that a coincidence, or how did that happen, he said?
No, it's not a coincidence. I mean, everybody goes through post-qualifying tech at some level. So, no, I don't think the fact that Lewis was poking around the rear wing had much to do with it. We should note, too, that rear wing issues go all the way back to the U.S. Grand Prix Dakota, where some of the teams were having problems with their rear wings fracturing over the bumps at Circuit of the Americas. These tolerances are so fine in F1. The parts are meant to sustain enormous pressures and tension and whatnot, but only in a certain way. And if you take them out of the element that they're meant to perform in, they can easily fracture. I mean, we talk about it with carbon fiber all the time. It's meant to work. The way it's laid up is meant to work stronger than steel and much, much lighter, but only in certain dimensions in which the collisions and crashes can be anticipated. If they get hit in a different direction that they're not designed and laid up for, then they can shatter. It's as simple as that. The stuff is so finely engineered.
Well, Bob, you were talking a minute ago about how it's not unusual for drivers to be over there looking at and apparently even touching cars before. But I think of late, the one who's done it the most has been Sebastian Vettel. He's been over there hanging out with Mick Schumacher and almost climbing in the car with him. But did you guys see, and we've got a quick little audio clip of, this is actually off of Twitter, where where Sebastian Vettel talks about touching the Hamilton's car. Let's play that clip real quick. You know what? We're having a technical issue, but bottom line, he walks up and says, I mean, he's on the radio and he says, "I'm going to touch Hamilton's car," just joking around. And the engineer says, "Don't touch it. Don't touch it." And what does Seb say, Les? He says,
maybe the front wing is maybe only the front wing. Maybe it's only 25,000.
25,000, yeah, versus 50,000 for the rear. But anyway, I love Seb's new sense of humor that we have from him. He seems to have settled into that a little bit. But all right, gentlemen, we need to take a break. Let's get our first break in, and when we come back, we'll continue to get ready for the Formula One Brazil Grand Prix. Listen to Speed City live from Austin, Texas. Back after these messages.
Hello to everyone, this is Gunther Steiner, this is Speed City.
You're listening to Speed City F1 on Sirius XM.
All right, welcome back to the show. Hope you got your coffee or whatever beverage. The phone number is 512-643-5483 if you want to call us and join the show, talk about what you're excited about. Also, if you like the sprint races or not, I'm kind of running that poll today. And I think I want to go next and talk about Friday qualifying. And Bob, you want to run down this qualifying results from Friday all the way, and then we'll lead into the discussion about the sprint race.
All right. As soon as I get the file open, that gives me those results. Okay, here we go. Friday qualifying classification was Max Verstappen first at a 108.372 for Red Bull. Valtteri Bottas, the newly revitalized Bottas. Then Sergio Perez in the second Red Bull. Pierre Gasly, terrific performances just come out of this Frenchman now. I mean, P4 against the might of Red Bull and Mercedes. Carlos Sainz Jr. and Charles Leclerc for the Ferrari team. Ferrari looking very tough in Brazil this weekend. Then Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo for McLaren. And a 2x2 theme continues with Fernando Alonso and Esteban Ocon with the two Alpines. Then Sebastian Vettel in the Aston Martin, Yuki Tsunoda for AlphaTauri, Kimi Räikkönen, his farewell event in Brazil for Alfa Romeo, followed by his teammate Antonio Giovinazzi, Lance Stroll and Nicholas Latifi for Aston and Williams, respectively, George Russell for Williams, who says he cannot figure out where the Williams-Mercedes team speed has gone. I mean, they were regular Q2 qualifiers, but it's just all evaporated, apparently. Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin in the two Haas cars, and then Lewis Hamilton with his DQ. But he was very, very quick, as we talked about earlier. So it was interesting to see the teams lining up 2x2. I suppose it's not a huge surprise when they do that, because two highly qualified drivers in the same car are probably going to qualify close to each other. But that's the way it went. Yeah. Moving on to the results of the sprint race, Valtteri Bottas got under Max Verstappen at the first corner, which is easy to do in Brazil. So it's Mercedes and Red Bull on the front row. Then Carlos Sainz with a terrific drive through to third, and the championship point for Ferrari. Fourth, Sergio Perez, dutiful number 2 at Red Bull. Fifth, Lewis Hamilton, but he will drop back with his 5-place grid penalty. Lando Norris sixth, Charles Leclerc seventh. Leclerc seems kind of down in the mouth this weekend. I don't think he understands why his teammate seems to be so much quicker. Pierre Gasly faded to 8th in the sprint race. Esteban Ocon 9th, Sebastian Vettel 10th, then Daniel Ricciardo, Fernando Alonso, Antonio Giovinazzi. And there's a story around that team this weekend. Apparently Giovinazzi's replacement at Alfa Romeo will be announced after the Brazilian Grand Prix, and it sounds like Giovinazzi is on the way out the door. Lance Stroll for Aston 14th, Yuki Tsunoda 15th, Nicholas Latifi and George Russell. So the Williams is consistently poor in 16th and 17th. Then Kimi Räikkönen, 18th, he spun. Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin in 19th and 20th, their traditional positions in race trim.
Yeah, sadly to say that's true. It has been a traditional spot for them of this whole entire year, hasn't it? But well, Bob, let's talk about the sprint race itself. We touched on the fact that Bottas started on different tires than Max Verstappen. Bottas started on those soft tires, and it looked like obviously it's a lot more than that. But man, he really shot out in front of Max Verstappen and never relinquished that lead. Why do you think Max could never catch Bottas? Or pass, I should say.
Max had an apparent gear shift problem in the Senna S's, which is the first downhill, left, right, left, before you get on to the first of the long straightaways here at Brazil. This circuit is interesting in that the first and third time segments are very, very fast, very very straight, certainly not level, but very, very quick. So quick, in fact, that you spend less time on the two first and third sectors combined than you do in the middle sector, which is where all the twisty bits are. You spend more time there than you do on the two fast sectors combined. So when they're going through those Senna S's down into that first straightaway, everybody wants to get the best launch they can out of that straightaway. So they're going to be prepared to take bigger risks the first time through the Senna S's. And we see the results with spins and off-track excursions at turn one. And I think we'll see more in the Grand Prix today.
So Les, what do you think about, I mean, in the sprint race it really, besides the fact of Hamilton coming through, which we'll talk about shortly here, but especially at the start where we saw Max go out and go off track and get in behind Carlos Sainz. What struck you about that at the beginning there?
The main thing is that in that start, it's so critical because of those S's, which then are compounded by the straightaway. And the fact that Max wasn't the only one going for an adventure off course.
Yeah.
But that so many of them did it. And one of the commentators in one of the Euro Series said something about the start of that is unique. And we mentioned, we talked off there a little bit about it's almost all uphill to begin with, but not all the cars are onto the uphill portion. It's not as steep, whatever. All of that builds kind of a false momentum that you got to mash harder to get that going. And by the time you get to those S's and towards a straightaway, you may have a real head of steam built up that you didn't need.
Yeah, and the way this turned out, let's look at so ultimately, Sergio Perez ended up fourth. I was just thinking about these second drivers that we've talked about recently, how important they've been, and Bottas doing exactly what he had to do on Saturday. And I guess you'd have to say it was disappointing sprint race for Red Bull because Max didn't win, number one, and Sergio Perez was down in fourth behind Sainz. So, Bob, what do you think about the fact that we talked about last week how these second drivers is so important? I mean, it just gets more important from this point forward, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Just as important as avoiding mechanical breakdowns, which may help explain why Lewis Hamilton took a fifth fresh engine for this weekend and the 5 grid spot penalty that comes with it. Toto Wolff, who runs the Mercedes team, said we were seeing degradation in the power output of the engine, and we decided Brazil would be the best place to take a fifth engine, which will hopefully be his last engine change of the year, but nothing is guaranteed. So mechanical reliability is critical, and certainly the performance of those second drivers, and not just up front with Bottas supporting Hamilton or Perez supporting Verstappen, but Ricciardo arguably supporting Norris in that great battle with Ferrari for best of the rest. Alonso supporting Ocon. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah,
it's going to be really, really, really critical, and I think Ferrari in particular has got something for everybody today, and it's going to be interesting to see how those two guys running so close together, Sainz and his a putative team leader, Leclerc, starting third and fifth, or sixth, I should say, how they handled their pit strategies during the race and their behavior on track.
Yeah, very good point. I mean, Ferrari did look fast, and Sainz hit. Yeah, who is actually the team leader over there at Ferrari right now? I guess it's not as important right now considering their position in the grid, but still. So, Bob, let's talk about Lewis Hamilton. We cannot skip this because we actually had a question earlier posed to us about Lewis Hamilton, and the question was, or message was, could any of the top drivers done what Lewis Hamilton did in the same car yesterday? And Bob, that question is directed at you again.
Short answer, I think, is yes. There are a couple of drivers, Verstappen being one of them. Taking nothing away from Lewis. I mean, that was a slashing drive. It was Lewis at his ruthless best, but always clean, and went from 20th up to 5th in just an epic drive. It's interesting that Bottas, who has probably taken more replacement engines than anybody, doesn't seem to be suffering from that power loss that Lewis does. And the problem for Lewis, obviously, is that he's got to lean on that engine now to make up these passes. He's got to take risks and hope that the equipment is up to the job. But yeah, I think, as good as Lewis is, I have to believe that fresh engine in the Mercedes made such a difference that, maybe another top driver could have done quite the same. Of course, having the equipment and using it to best advantage are two very different things. I mean, you can be fast as hell and start 20th and stay 20th if you're not willing to utilize the racecraft that allows you to make overtakes. And it helps that this is a track where it's reasonably easy to make overtakes. You see a lot of them typically in Brazil.
Yeah, you were commenting, Bob, that you were surprised that we didn't see more, and during the sprint race, and hopefully we'll see plenty today in today's race, which we are now about 30 minutes away from. So let's get our last break in before we do, but let's hear a word from our sponsor. The Speed City F1 pre-race show on SiriusXM is brought to you by CrowdStrike. Use the cloud to secure your team in the office, at the track, or anywhere with CrowdStrike at crowdstrike.com/anywhere. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our discussion of the Formula One Brazilian Grand Prix coming up. Listen to Speed City back after these messages.
Hi, this is Gene Haas, and this is Speed City.
You're listening to Speed City F1 on SiriusXM.
I think Gene Haas had a birthday this week, too. I think Lando Norris, Gene Haas, all celebrating birthdays this week. But
Are you sure it was Gene and not?
Gene and not Gunther?
No, I'm not Gene. I'm Gunther.
Okay, thanks.
You're never,
Thanks for the clarity.
You're never going to live that down. And the fact you just threw yourself under the bus, I love that.
Yeah, hey, just to get a laugh.
Hey, Les Kaiser, you had a question for Bob Varsha about reverse grids and what we saw yesterday.
Yeah, I know. I can zip up my flak jacket and put a helmet on
I know.
for the defense here. But honestly, didn't Hamilton just prove that a reverse grid would make the race more exciting?
What do you think, Bob?
Arguably, yes.
What do you think, Bob? You think that?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I think the evidence is there. I mean, the race was more exciting watching Hamilton scythe through the field. I mean, there's a reason why so many dirt track championships use reverse grids, because it juices things up. But it raises the questions. Is everybody trying as hard as they could when it comes time to set the grid? And is it too gimmicky?
I'm going to say no, it's not too gimmicky. You raise a valid point. Is everybody trying their hardest at the point, knowing that, okay, I've finished first, now I've got to go to the back of the grid for the real race? So I think to protect from that scenario is add some points to the qualifying so that somebody doesn't sandbag, so if they wind up in the middle of the grid only to have to cover half the grid to win the race.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's some responses that can be put in there to keep them honest there.
Let me give out the phone number right now, just in case any of the purists want to, 512-643-5483 if you want to call and talk about that topic or anything else.
Tell me how wrong I am.
Yeah. But I have another thing I want to talk about, and it has to do with Lewis Hamilton coming through the grid, and that is Hamilton starting 10th, a very right smack dab in the middle of this pack. Bob, with all your years of talking about Formula One, what do you think about the possibilities of him getting in a tangle or a snafu right in the middle of all that?
Well, we hear it over and over in all different kinds of motorsports. Nobody wants to be in the middle of everything, which is where the backups and the crashes and accidents happen. Surely you want to be out front where you can pull clear of all of that kind of activity. So yeah, Lewis is in some jeopardy there. He's going to have to be very careful about how he hopes to move forward. Now, Lewis coming from 20th and picking up essentially the back half of the grid plus another 5 positions yesterday was very different from him starting 10th and trying to pass the likes of Ocon, who beat him in Hungary, Pierre Gasly, who has a lot at stake, and then Norris and the Ferraris and Perez and all that sort of thing. So it's going to be very tough for Lewis to advance in the best of circumstances. And if, panic breaks out in the middle of the field, he is, as you say, right in a position of potential jeopardy. So, I'm sure that enters his thinking as well. And on this whole subject of reversing grids, keep in mind that the F2 series does that between their sprint and their feature races. So it's not unheard of at very high levels in world motorsport.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, there's one guy he doesn't have to worry about coming from back there. Lando has stated he will not stand in the way and invest tire wear to keep Hamilton behind him. And so I think that that's an interesting take on it, but also understand it as well that he won't go that way.
That's curious to me why Lando would say that. I mean, is he's that worried about tire degradation? Now, yeah, Pirelli says the fastest tire strategy is going to be a 2-stop starting on the medium compound, as everybody does. The window opens at 17 laps, go to a set of hards, go another 30 or 35 laps, and then a final set of hards. If not a set of reds, if you have them available. Now, most of the teams have used up their reds. And it's interesting to note that the Aston Martin boys, Vettel and Stroll, have used up their entire tire allotment. They have no fresh Pirelli slicks for the race. So they're going to be unused, scuffed tires, if you will, with every tire change. And I think a lot of the teams are going to be watching what their lap times do. Because we haven't raced here at Brazil in 2 years. It's going to be warmer today than it was yesterday. So if scuffed tires somehow provide any kind of an advantage, that's something to think about very quickly.
Yeah, this is pretty unusual, isn't it? Have not a single set of new tires to race with.
Definitely. Very unusual.
And so let's talk about the tire stop strategies that are going on today. I mean, what is Pirelli saying, Bob?
Well, as I said, you're going to do 2 stops, start on the medium, which I believe everybody in the top 10 and probably further back are going to do, if not on the hards. The red tires are not terribly preferred here, except for that one golden lap in qualifying. And perhaps at the end of the race, when somebody in the top 10, not able to improve their position, stops in for a fresh set of reds to go for that championship point for fast lap. But other than that, it looks like the mediums and especially the hards are going to be the tires to be on unless conditions early in the race prove otherwise. So do a couple of stops, go from the medium to the hard, and then another set of fresh hards to take you to the end, or mix them up in some way. Do a medium hard if that's what you've got, or start on the hards, try to run longer than the guys ahead of you, and then go to the medium to get a marginally faster out lap so you can overcut, as it's known, pitting after your rivals and then beating them with fresher tires when you come out of the pits. So, yeah, there's all sorts of possibilities here, and hopefully we'll see a lot of them play out.
And Les, what about the weather? I mean, it's been cloudy all weekend. I mean, what are the chances of rain? I just said the
chances,
R word.
Yeah, there you go. Chances of rain in Sao Paulo are always a good chance. But it's also a good chance of a lot of heat. They often have a wide range of temperature throughout the day. in this area. So it really is something that is somewhat unpredictable. But right now, it's been damp and going. I haven't looked to see what the camera's doing currently, but yeah, you got to be prepared for everything in Sao Paulo.
Okay, where I was thinking we throw rain tires in this whole tire discussion. Bob, anybody going to try a one-stopper?
Conceivably, depending once again on what kind of tire deg they experience early on, it would be somebody trying to come from the back, I would think, unless someone like a Lewis Hamilton comes through, gains a position he likes a lot, and wants to stay out on his tires. And Lewis, it must be said, has had really good success with the tires this year, something Lewis was not always known for, unlike guys like Perez, who are very, very good at tire whispering, if you will. So yeah, one stop's possible, but Pirelli says that doesn't come out of the model data as being the quickest way to go. But again, anything can happen. I don't think we're going to see rain, and as Les pointed out, it rains every other day in this country, and contributed to one of my favorite, perhaps my favorite Formula One finish that I was a part of broadcasting, which was 2008 when Lewis Hamilton passed Timo Glock. Lewis on intermediates in the wet, Glock on slicks in the rain. Felipe Massa comes through in front of his home crowd, wins the race for Ferrari, wins provisionally the world championship, until Lewis got Timo Glock in the last corner of the last lap of the last race of the season and seized his first world championship back from Felipe Massa and his family, who were all pictured in the Ferrari garage celebrating like crazy, and rightly so. Yeah, I mean, it was, as Steve Matchett, my colleague, said on the air, the racing gods are just toying with us today. It was really spectacular stuff.
All righty. So currently, not a lot of wind, but the wind will pick up in about the next hour and a half. Looking at 75 degrees, expected to drop off by 4 degrees ambient temperature in the next couple of hours. So probably an hour and a half of that will be something we're interested in. But that's an example. It's already cooling off. They've already had their hottest part of the day and the temperature for the day. So
what do they say about clouds? Is it cloudy at all?
Mostly cloudy, partly cloudy, going to mostly cloudy, and that will be waning. Going to mostly cloudy before the day's over.
This is a typical weather forecast. In other words, they have no idea is what you're saying.
Anything can happen.
Exactly.
Right? Well, the reason I ask is the sunlight, radiant energy on the track can raise the track temperature, and that can throw another variable into the equation. If it's cloudy, the track continues to cool down evenly, and you take that into account as well. I mean, it's all part of the game.
So if I hear you right, I've got a chance at being a weather forecaster because I can talk a lot, but no real content.
That's right. Yeah. You have a great career in front of you.
Okay, speaking of making up ground, Gasly has he's been great all year, right? He's been one of the stars of the season, right? So, and Bob, he was one of the ones that ended up worse off for wear after qualifying, and I mean after the sprint race, because he did better in qualifying. And so, what do you think about Gasly today? You think he's gonna because I think he qualified on Friday back up in was it 5th, and now he's slipped back to finish 8th after being passed by Hamilton, being part of that problem. But what do you think about Gasly today? He's been such a fun one to watch this season. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I don't know what Gasly's problem was, whether it was just the general hubbub during the early laps of that race, because things happen quickly in a 24-lap race. He'll start 7th today after Hamilton's relegation. And, I think it's all there in front of him. Again, like Hamilton, he's got some fast guys. I don't know if Norris or Leclerc or Perez or Sainz are going to let him by. I suspect not. But he's a fairly ruthless passer. And I think Gasly, given an opportunity, will move up again. Yeah, I expect to see him in the top 5 or 6. I think he'll improve at least a place or 2, depending on what happens to the guys in front of him.
One last little story before we go to our last break, and that is, I saw you put it in the show doc. Really caught my eye, and that was Nikita Mazepin Did you see how emotional he got? It was very interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and there's a story that is running about the background behind that. He's not pleased with the performance in general, but he's also concerned with team members going in and out of his garage team, engineers, managers, different folks amongst the group, and how that, to be honest, I kind of feel like, well, that probably rattles him, regardless of the tribal knowledge, if you will, of folks going in and out, rotating in and out of positions in his garage space.
Yeah, but and when he was, they showed him interview after qualifying, and he was obviously not pleased with his performance, but he was basically brought to tears about the whole situation, about his performance and all the team garage and all that. It was pretty fascinating, and then there's a couple of YouTube videos out there if you want to go check that out. But I thought it was interesting that he, because it's not the persona that we saw when we interviewed him at COTA a few weeks
Right.
ago, and it's not the persona that you get after the shenanigans early in the season, with
Yep.
the young girl and all that. So I just thought that was interesting.
I think he's really taken it to heart. And, we kind of, wrongfully have a preconceived notion about these. And him being of Russian descent probably doesn't help that for an American audience. He's not just iron chisel and stiff jawed. He's, as we experienced, I think we could all say he was a nice guy and fun and comical.
Surprised me actually when we
And,
interviewed him. Yeah.
Everything we'd want, in those few minutes from anybody else we met. And so I think seeing this just reiterates what can't be seen is he is absolutely taking this opportunity very seriously. And, he's frustrated.
He's got a car that's
I'm
not.
sure.
Yeah, he's got a car that's not allowing him either. Well, guys,
Right.
let's get our last break in, and then when we get back, we'll just be about 10 minutes from the race. You listen to Speed City F1 on Sirius XM. Back after these messages.
Hello, I'm Jenny Gow from BBC F1. You are listening to Speed City.
You're listening to Speed City F1 on Sirius XM.
All right, welcome back to the show. We are just about 10 or 15 minutes tops from the start of the Formula One Brazilian Grand Prix. And Bob Varsha, I want to talk to you about Interlagos. I know you kind of smiled when we talked about Interlagos before and the memories and the history, Ayrton Senna, etc. So I want to let you talk a little bit about this circuit.
Well, obviously, the Sao Paulo, the Interlagos circuit, between the lakes in English, has a long history. Was built in 1938 on land that was deemed unsuitable for building housing because it shifts, and that affects the racetrack and its quality. And no disrespect, one of the things that always fascinated me about Interlagos when we went there to broadcast, it sits at the foot of a massive landfill for one of the biggest cities in the world. So if your work took you late into the evening at the racetrack, you could come out and watch the stars in the sky and the plumes of flame coming from the methane burn-off towers at this landfill. And if you watch closely in the race today, the director is going to try to do everything he can to avoid seeing that landfill on camera. But be that as it may, it has a fabulous history. It was once basically a roval. It was long and fast. I had a great conversation with John Watson about what it was like. At Interlagos, you just pinned your ears back and away you went. Named for Brazilian driver Jose Carlos Pache after he was killed in a plane crash in 1975, a winner at the track. And of course, most of all, it's Ayrton Senna's hometown. And he's buried in the Morumbi Cemetery, which is not far from the track, easy to get to, easy to enter, and you can walk right up to the grave of the great driver, which is a very emotional thing for a lot of people. And there's a tremendous pilgrimage among the Formula One clan to go there when they're in town. So all these years after Senna was killed in 1994, that says a lot about the way he was regarded. But it's also a fabulous track to race on. We talked about the Senna S's, the two long straightaways that you have to get right, the potential for rain and how it can affect the race. Lots of fast corners, lots of very slow corners too, but only 15 corners at all around the lap. Fairly short lap, partly because the track's not that long, but partly because it is so fast. And in particular, watch from the onboards at the way the drivers use the pit entry. Now, I'm going to be interested to see, we've had drivers penalized for crossing the white line that defines the pit entry. That is typically the racing line at Interlagos. So the drivers are going to have to move to the right a little bit on that long, sweeping up-hand left-hander that takes you to start-finish. It should be great fun. And, of course, there's the Brazilian fans who will be as nutso as ever.
All right, on that note, we're going to get a word from our sponsor in. Has your workforce moved from the office to the home or to the garage or maybe a rented cabin with open Wi-Fi? If your company has expanded outside the office and moved all your applications to the cloud, there's a whole new world of threats you have to worry about, including ransomware. CrowdStrike revolutionized security by harnessing the speed and power of the cloud to identify and stop the most advanced cyber attacks, even those that have never been seen before. So now you can work securely anywhere. Try CrowdStrike Falcon free today and protect your data and employees anywhere. Welcome to Anywhere. CrowdStrike. We stop breaches. Access the CrowdStrike Falcon platform free at crowdstrike.com/anywhere. And guys, my 9 to 5, I recommended CrowdStrike to our IT team, and they said, we're already signed up with them, and we're going to launch it soon. So I'm going to be using CrowdStrike at the office 9 to 5 every day myself. So
there you go.
Hey, Bob, you were talking about Interlagos and Sao Paulo, and I think about the modern day Formula One car with the incredible lateral G-forces and just the way the car, we keep setting faster and faster lap times, right? Every year at every circuit, but the top speeds are the same or even slower sometimes. And doesn't this seem like this is such a great, this car and this downforce and these lateral Gs, doesn't it seem like a great fit for this circuit?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, each year, the rules makers do everything they can to slow the cars down, and brilliant engineers do everything they can to speed them up again. We've talked in the past about the inroads on fuel efficiency, that the hybrid Formula One power unit, no matter what you might think about it, the cars are going faster than ever, using a third less fuel. The Mercedes engine is one that has achieved 50% efficiency. That is, getting 50% of the available energy out of the fuel being used. Your normal street car gets maybe half of that. So what these cars represent is something really extraordinary. They're not as fast in a straight line, but they are faster in lap time because they get better and better going through the corners, the downforce levels, the aerodynamic refinements that come with each new set of rules. It's really remarkable from an engineering perspective.
Yeah, and of course, the instantaneous torque. There's no, coming out of a corner now is a whole new experience. I can't even imagine what these guys, that especially that going back a few years, thinking about shifting from the V8s to these hybrid cars where you're coming out of the corner, it's just a rocket ship. If you've ever driven any electric car, even the slowest electric car, you have that. So anyway, I'm excited to watch these cars on this circuit and be thinking about all of that, about how these cars are such a good fit for that. But let's see what else we got to talk about before the race. We now have about 4 minutes. So, but let's talk about some of the stats. It's 2.677 miles. It's 15 corners, 2 DRS zones, and about 71 laps scheduled here. So we'll see how that works out. We talked about Lewis Hamilton coming through here, starting at 10th. This is going to be fun to watch. What about the very start of the race, Bob? What are you expecting there?
I'm expecting a marked accordion effect at the first turn, where they dive down on the left-hander into the Senna S's. And, we saw Kimi Räikkönen in the sprint race, got it wrong, got spun around. And that happens a lot. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get that. Hopefully everybody gets through those first S's okay, is able to rein in that urge to get the best possible launch onto the first straightaway and let things settle down just that little bit. Lewis Hamilton is going to be the guy to watch, because he picked up, 4 places on the first lap?
Yeah.
Many of them at the first corner in the sprint race yesterday. So I'm sure the guys ahead of him are going to be looking in their mirrors for Lewis, because I think he's going to be slashing and dashing.
Yeah, Lewis Hamilton, of course, starting in 10th, doing all that. Right in front of him, though, you've got so you got Vettel, Ocon, and then Gasly. Depending on whether or not that Gasly has a fight with Leclerc right in front of him. But when he reaches that point, to just like yesterday, the first few laps he passed 15 total cars. The first 10 were easy. The next 5 they got progressively harder. So that's going to be a big part of this. But let's look back. We talked about the front of the grid. Let's look at the back a little bit. We've talked about the Haas teams in the back. And George Russell, I don't think we said this, though. We talked that he was out-qualified, but am I right about this? This is the very first time all season Latifi has out-qualified Russell?
I can't recall another time.
Second time.
Oh, it's the second time? Okay. Well, I knew it was rare, but so we got that
I
happening.
believe so. Yeah, I think he did it. Latifi got him in the other sprint race, I think. But
Okay.
another guy to keep an eye on, I think, is going to be Fernando Alonso. Now, it's possible at turn 1, driver's right at Brazil, to kind of go off and on again. It's very tempting. And keep in mind, Alonso has been using this technique most prominently in Russia at Sochi, inventing his own racetrack, as it were, to maybe not improve your position so much, but to avoid collisions and maintain momentum, which, as I said, is critical in those first corners at Brazil to get on that back straight. So starting from where he is, he's 12th, he's going to be on the move too, I think.
All right, Les, we're down to just a little bit left in the show, so I want to get your predictions.
All righty.
Let's start with you.
I agree with Bob on cutting the corner there, because that's going to carry momentum into the S's.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Valtteri, Max, and then I think Ham's going to make it past everybody and get on podium on third.
I like that. That's a very smart, logical prediction. What about you, Bob?
I'm thinking Max. I think Carlos Sainz, as I mentioned earlier, I think Ferrari's got something for him. So I see Sainz second and Hamilton third.
Okay.
I only worry about the longevity of Sainz out there.
You stole mine. I was trying to get Sainz in there somewhere. I think I'm going to say Verstappen wins, Hamilton second, and then Sainz. That's what I'm going to go with. And I want to see. I don't know. Lando. I just had a feeling this weekend he might do well. He's starting in 5th, so we'll see what happens. But all right, everybody, we are out of time. Don't forget, you can listen to the entire race right here on Channel 81 on Sirius XM. You can also join us for the post-race show. We're going to have a full hour to revel in what you just listened to. And write the phone number down and give us a call after the show, 512-643-5483. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you after the race.